Why don't we go around and say what our relationship is to neighborhood courts and maybe how long we've been doing it? And NICOS people, if you can introduce yourselves. Everybody in NICOS is doing the large part of the presenting today. So please welcome Michael and Sianne and Allyson, and they'll introduce themselves. I am the neighborhood courts observer and coordinator, and I've been here for about 9 months now. And I will pass it. I guess we can go. The order's probably different. So why don't we just pass off to another person? I'll pass to Michael.
Hello, my name is Michael. My pronouns are he, him. I've been with NICOS for about 18 years. I've had the privilege of working with community boards, neighborhood courts over the years. And so this is not our first collaboration. And so we're really glad to be here again to do the work together. I'll pass it on to my colleague, Allyson.
Hi everyone, I'm Allyson. I use the She series. I work at NICOS as a Class Act health educator, and Class Act is kind of a program that the San Francisco Department of Public Health created to really emphasize and talk about cultural competence standards in health. So I work part-time at NICOS, and I also work part-time at UCSF's California Poison Control System. Yay! So yeah, and I'll pass it off to Sianne.
Good afternoon or evening, everyone. My name is Sianne. I use the She series pronouns. I'm a second-year UC Berkeley Masters of Social Work student, and I've also been an intern with NICOS for the past year. So excited to be talking to everyone this evening. And I will pass it on to Blake.
Hi, my name is Blake, and I live in the Richmond, and I've been doing neighborhood court for, I don't know, seven or 8 years. I'm not exactly positive. I think that's all you need to know. Gabrielle, why don't I go to you?
Thank you. My name is Gabriela, and I've been on neighborhood courts. It's such an interesting question because it's been for so long. I was thinking, worked with her. Linda, how long have you been? I think Linda, yeah, but
I just
maybe
use 10 years as a milestone. It's probably more, but I just use 10 years.
I'd say 10, 12. How long has neighborhood court been on? Long time. Anyway, I'm doing neighborhood court, and I'm in the training for mediation through the community boards. And I'll pass to Linda because I already asked how long you've been doing this.
Well, thanks. And now I don't have to say that part. So my name is Linda McKay, and I started out in the Bayview Court because that's my neighborhood. But because I was working, I did Soma Night Court for a long time, and now I do lots of different courts. So anyway, and I also work with community boards. I mediate and have done the training with community boards as well. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Karen.
And Linda, I have to say, you do it so well.
Oh, thank you, Karen. That's very sweet.
I've been with the neighborhood courts over 10 years too, and when it was called community courts, and I still sometimes say community court. I live in the Haight-Ashbury, and I'm happy to be here tonight.
Can you choose
Regina?
Hi, thank you. I'm Regina Anavy. I'm sorry it took me so long to get on. I had to update my Zoom app. I've been doing neighborhood court for 12 years, and I usually am assigned to the Bayview court, but I sort of, especially with Zoom, I can go all over. So happy to be here with you all. And I'll pass it on to, let's see, Blake. I don't see who else is on here.
I'm Jean. I'm at the end. I don't know if my name isn't on there anyway. I
can't see you, but I'll go ahead.
Unless there's someone else that's ready to go.
No, Jean, please go.
Okay, I've been with neighborhood court for, gosh, it seems like almost 20 years, but I don't know, again, how long neighborhood court has been in existence. It seems like it's been forever, which it should be. Anyway, I work with a mission court and live in the Mission District, and that's come from teaching at San Francisco State, but I'm long time retired, and still volunteer at the Arboretum. So just keep busy. That's it. And I don't think there's anyone I need to pass it to except back to Liz, maybe.
Still have a couple of folks, I think Nancy and Shaylin and B.
Bye.
I'll go. Oh, hi, sorry.
Who wants to go?
I'll go, Liz. It's Valerie. So hi, everyone. I'm Valerie, and I've been with Neighborhood Corp for about 7 to 8 years now. And I learned a lot from joining the Neighborhood Court. And my day job, I work for the bank. I'm a chief lending officer.
Thanks. I don't know if you can see anybody from the car. Nancy, would you like to go?
Sure. Hi, I'm Nancy, and I've been with Neighborhood Courts for about 3 years. Sound like a baby, huh? Everyone has at least 10 years. And I've been with community boards for about 6. Who's left?
Shaylin.
Shaylin. I don't see her.
Oh, Shay's there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you put some light on your face?
Sorry. I don't know if that's a little bit better.
I can see.
That's the brightest it goes. I'm Shay. I've been with Neighborhood Court for about a year, a little over a year now, year and a few months, and I'm a restorative justice case manager. Nice to see everybody.
Ellie, would you like to go?
Yes, my name is Ellie. I am a restorative justice case manager, Shay's co-case manager. I've been with Neighborhood Court for about a year and a half.
Thank you, Ellie. Sharon?
Hi, my name is Sharon Rose. I'm with San Francisco Pretrial Diversion, and I have managed the neighborhood program with the case managers. Shaylin and Ellie are all the case managers that have come along with Neighborhood Court for like the last 7 years. And I believe to answer some of the questions, I think Neighborhood Court has actually been around since 2012. But like Karen was saying, but it was, before that it was, I think, called Community Courts. I think it was CCDS, I think were the acronym. So it's actually kind of been around before it took over the name of Neighborhood Court, but Neighborhood Court itself has been around since, I believe 2012. And again, I've been managing the case managers for about the last 7 years. And I also apologize. I'll have to jump off at about 6:30, but I'm happy to be on for even a short period of time. So thank you for the training today.
Thanks, Sharon. So I'm going to go over a few Zoom tips that might be helpful for this. For one thing, can everybody go up to your view menu? Can you all see that?
Mm-hmm.
And
Share the visual.
And do you all, the view actually on the menu I was thinking about. Can you take the
Take
slide
it off.
a second? Yeah, just for a moment. I wanted to make sure that everybody has, do you all have your controls visible at the bottom of your screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the one thing I wanted to show you. Okay, then can you see your chat
Yes.
button?
Yeah.
Can everybody click and put that on so the chat's visible?
Yes.
And
You can arrange it.
yes.
You can size it, but then I don't see everybody else.
Right. But you can size it. So that was one of the things. Hi. So to size it, you can put your cursor to the left of the chat, to the right of the main window, till it turns into like a little slidey thing, and make the chat bigger or smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And feel free if anyone has any questions. Now, Michael, would you put the slide up again, please?
Sure.
So I wanted to show you that when a slide is up, if you click on the view button in the upper right-hand corner, and do you see side-by-side speaker and side-by-side gallery?
Mhm.
So click on the speaker one first. And I also wanted to show you that you can use your cursor to enlarge the speaker if you wanted to see more of the speaker and a little bit less of the slide. Does anybody have trouble doing that?
So we put the cursor, I see an arrow going here.
You put it on the edge of the right of the margin where
I got it. Yeah, good.
And I get a little cross sign, and then if you, yeah.
And
Got
then you click on do the other options to side-by-side gallery, and then you can see everybody and still see the slide.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, I just wanted to give you all those options. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I think we're going to have Allyson start us off. And I think, Allyson, let me know when to advance the slides.
Okay, will do. So thank you all for joining us this evening. We're just going to go over our workshop title, which is called Widening Our Personal Lens, Exploring Cross-Cultural Communication. So I believe, next slide, please. I believe Liz is recording right now, but I will also record on, so like, we'll just use Liz's recording because I don't think I can also record for some reason. But yeah, just a reminder that this workshop will be recorded. So if you do have to leave for some reason, just know that we'll have this recording available for everyone. Next slide, please. Okay, so usually we do a land acknowledgement. I think for the sake of time, I'll just allow folks to read it while I explain a little bit about it. We've been trying to incorporate this more in our trainings because I think it's important for us to acknowledge the people who came before us who are the original inhabitants of this land. So this specifically relates to the San Francisco Peninsula. If you're interested to see what territory you're specifically on, if you're not on the San Francisco Peninsula, you can check out this link that I believe Sianne will drop in the chat, or I can drop in the chat later. But yes, moving forward. Just some housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves muted. If you do have something or any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to use the chat box that Liz has helpfully walked us through, or you can use the raise hand function. Sianne will also go over how to access that function. And just as a reminder, we do have a survey at the end of our presentation. So if you're able to, please stick around at the end to fill it out for us. Next slide. Okay, so this is our storefront, NICOS Chinese Health Coalition. We're a small nonprofit located in San Francisco, Chinatown. Our main mission is to enhance the health and the well-being of San Francisco's Chinese community. We were founded back in 1985, and NICOS is actually an acronym for our 5 founding organizations. That includes Northeast Medical Services, Chinese Community Healthcare Association, Chinese Hospital, On Lock, and Self-Help for the Elderly. At NICOS, even though we are a relatively small team, we have done a lot. We've done research, we've done advocacy, we've done community outreach and building, and we also provide workshops such as these. Next slide, please. Okay, a little bit of introductions. I think we've already introduced ourselves, so I'll go ahead and move forward from this slide. Some objectives for today. So to begin, we'll talk about culture, what does it mean, how it's fluid and it's evolving, and then we'll kind of tie in culture to our diversity, whether that's the diversity of our experiences or the diversity of our identities. Then we'll move on from there and talk about some concepts that we're familiar with, but might not know exactly what they mean. So we'll talk about biases, discrimination, power, and privilege. And then we'll close off with some steps towards achieving greater cultural responsiveness and also talk a bit about cross-cultural communication conflicts. Some general agreements as we move along with this presentation. First, we want to create an open learning environment. We recognize that everyone is on their own journeys. So just really keeping that in mind. Next, what's said here stays here. So some of us here might share some stories that are personal to ourselves, and we hope you also feel comfortable in doing so. Just know that whatever is said in this space will remain in this space. Next is engage. We will have some discussion prompts and discussion questions. Feel free to engage with us, share your thoughts via chat or by raising your hand and unmuting. Next, note our feelings, mind our reactions. So some of the topics that we talk about today might be of a sensitive nature or might invoke some feelings. If they do, feel free to share so. We'd love to hear what feelings are evoked, how you might feel that way, and kind of just break that down. Lastly, step up/step back. I think that also relates with engage. So feel free to speak up. We always want to hear everyone's thoughts. But if you're someone who has shared a lot of their thoughts already, feel free to step back to make room for those who haven't. Next slide. Okay, and then I'll pass this part to Sianne.
So I think we covered this slide already. Next slide, please. We talked about moving the borders over. Next slide. So again, I think folks are familiar with where to find the chat button, so that should be good. And something that we also wanted to highlight as well is there's also a raise hand function. So I think folks are able to unmute, throw in the chat if they have questions or just want to get our attention. But another thing that you can do is go down to the panel at the bottom, look for the reactions button, which kind of has an icon of a face, and then raise hand is at the very bottom. So please feel free to use that, and one of us will notify the other speakers. Great. Next slide, please. So to get started, we'll be talking about reflecting on our own self-awareness of the diversity of cultures. Next slide, please. So to begin, we'd like to show a video because I think it helps us realize how easy it can be to be stuck in our own mindset and ideas of what is normal. Next slide, please.
So imagine you're standing on a street anywhere in America, and a Japanese man comes up to you and says, excuse me, what is the name of this block? And you say, I'm sorry, well, this is Oak Street, that's Elm Street. This is 26th, that's 27th. He says, okay, but what is the name of that block? And you say, well, blocks don't have names. Streets have names. Blocks are just the unnamed spaces in between streets. He leaves a little confused and disappointed. So now imagine you're standing on a street anywhere in Japan. You turn to a person next to you and say, excuse me, what is the name of this street? And they say, oh, well, that's block 17 and this is block 16. And you say, okay, but what is the name of this street? And they say, well, streets don't have names. Blocks have names. Just look at Google Maps here. There's block 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. All of these blocks have names, and the streets are just the unnamed spaces in between the blocks. And you say, okay, then how do you know your home address? I said, well, easy. This is District 8. There's block 17, house number 1. They say, okay, but walking around the neighborhood, I noticed that the house numbers don't go in order. He said, of course they do. They go in the order in which they were built. The first house ever built on a block is house number 1. The second house ever built is house number 2. Third is house number 3. It's easy. It's obvious. So I love that sometimes we need to go to the opposite side of the world to realize assumptions we didn't even know we had and realize that the opposite of them may also be true. So for example, there are doctors in China who believe that it's their job to keep you healthy. So any month you are healthy, you pay them. And when you're sick, you don't have to pay them because they failed at their job. They get rich when you're healthy, not sick. In most music, we think of the 1 as the downbeat, the beginning of the musical phrase. 1, 2, 3, 4. But in West African music, the 1 is thought of as the end of the phrase, like the period at the end of a sentence. So you can hear it not just in the phrasing, but the way they count off their music. 2, 3, 4, 1. And this map is also accurate. There's a saying that whatever true thing you can say about India, the opposite is also true. So let's never forget, whether at TED or anywhere else, that whatever brilliant ideas you have or hear, that the opposite may also be true. Domo arigatou gozaimashita.
Great. So from that video, I think one of the main takeaways is this idea that someone's truth may be completely different from yours. Usually, no matter what our various cultural backgrounds are, we tend to think what I think is good, and what I think is normal must also be what other people think is normal. And it's not until we meet folks who might not necessarily share our same worldviews that we realize, hey, there's so many different kinds of normal. Today's training isn't about changing your views on what's normal and what's good, but to help you become more aware of your own blind spots, so that way we can be more sensitive to folks who might be different from us. Next slide, please. So to begin, we have a quick brainstorm for y'all. If folks want to unmute or throw in the chat and answer some of these questions, what is culture? Where does culture come from? Or what purpose does culture serve? Yes, to begin, does someone want to share what they think of when they hear the word culture?
Sure, it's Linda. When I think of culture, I think it's a collection of behaviors that bind a group together. Common beliefs, common ethos. That's how I think of culture. Common experiences.
Yeah, similar behaviors, ways of thinking, ways of how they interact. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Does anyone else want to add what they think of when they hear the word culture? No? Okay. Well, how about where does culture come from? How do we learn about culture? See in the chat, someone wrote family. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
History.
History, yeah. So learning from our past.
Family.
The school.
School, yeah. So
Family first, I think.
Yeah, our family tends to be where we start to learn about culture, and maybe in school and other spaces when we're interacting with friends and other folks within our neighborhood, we start to pick up other belief systems or thoughts around ours and cultures.
Yeah. Media?
In the media, yes, the media is really important. Even within social media, it's been a lot of ways for folks to get connected to cultures that they are a part of, but might not necessarily get to experience because there aren't folks who are similar to them. Great. And then lastly, what purpose does culture serve?
Hopefully to unite people.
Yeah. Have a sense of belonging, a sense of coming together. Yeah.
I think you can only move forward as part of a culture or as part of a support group.
Support group. Yeah, I think that's important. Like, in addition to sense of belonging, it's having that sense of community, folks you can connect with, share ideas with. Great. Next slide, please. Thanks for sharing, everyone. So we wanted to highlight some of these different ideas around culture. So for one, I loved everyone's different thoughts that they shared about where culture comes from. And I think I appreciated that there were so many different categories or things that we can think about within that. I think sometimes there can be a default when we hear the word culture is to think about race or ethnicity and kind of limit folks towards that. But as y'all have mentioned, there's so many different ways that culture interacts and different ways that folks can have cultures. So for instance, stability status, immigration status, even geographical location, what it means to be from the East Bay versus San Francisco, what it means to grow up in Bayview Hunter Point versus the Mission. There's so many different cultures that folks have, and with culture also comes cultural identities. Something I also wanted to highlight too is that there's also different axes of identification. So for instance, folks who are refugees might identify more with folks who are also refugees and have similar experiences than folks who might be from the country. And I think with this idea of culture too, similar to the video that we just watched, where we can see how different cultures might interact, how we experience the world, or have our defaults of understanding what the streets are versus the blocks are, and how we would explain how to navigate like destinations. There's also ways that cultures can affect our belief systems, such as different thoughts or values around selling sex or selling alcohol. Great. And then lastly, I also wanted to highlight with culture as well is that it's fluid and evolving. There isn't a set culture, there isn't a set definition. We do learn about culture in the history books, but it continues to evolve and it continues to change. It isn't this set stagnant thing. Great. So for the sake of time, we'll skip this video, but this is just demonstrating another example of culture and how culture can also play out in terms of dominant groups. So for instance, I think in our society, we tend to think of the default as folks being able-bodied and not having disabilities, but this video demonstrates an often opposite scenario in which folks with disabilities are actually the dominant culture and the dominant group, and folks who are able-bodied are the minority. Great. Next slide, please. So just wrapping up our ideas on culture, something we wanted to highlight is that all participants have intersecting identities that make up the unique individual. We aren't just our race, or we aren't just where we grew up, or some of our different backgrounds. There's lots of identities that we hold, and how we navigate and experience the world is as a result of these different identities and not just a single one. Something we also wanted to discuss was this idea of intersecting identities and how they also create unique experiences when folks walk through life. For instance, folks with darker skin may have more nervousness or hesitancy around the police or law enforcement because of past experiences for folks of that group. Folks who are refugees or immigrants might have more distrust of the government because of previous policies that have existed or different things that have occurred. And then lastly, our society is structured in a way to give invisible privileges to certain identities and disadvantages to others. So we'll be talking about that a little bit more in the next section. With that, I'll pass it on to Michael.
I'll just share that because of time, we may have to skip some stuff, but we will share everything with Liz to be able to pass on to you ultimately, including links to all videos, as well as a copy of the slide deck. So I want to make sure we kind of hear a little bit of your thoughts on the next section, which is talking about, you know, as panelists. And first, I want to say I'm just so in awe that so many of you really have been with community boards in each of its iterations almost from the start. And that really shows the level of commitment and passion you have for restorative justice. And we really just, you know, are so in awe of all of your work. And, you know, I think a lot of these concepts, we probably have a general idea of what they mean, but I would really love to take this moment to kind of set the tone and see how all of these concepts may apply to your work as panelists in folks who are working within the restorative justice movement. So can folks kind of share your personal thoughts? We all know the word, we all know the terminology, but how would you kind of explain the concept of bias to someone who may be unfamiliar with the word? Like, what analogies would you use? What does it mean to you to have a bias or to be biased?
I would say it would be having a strong opinion before you have any information.
Ah, okay. So kind of some preconceived notions, but also strong ways you feel about something before you have all the facts. Really love that. Does anyone want to add any other analogies or ways you think about bias?
Well, I think building on, sorry. Oh, go ahead, Karen. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I have to go leave. There was a suicide across the street. No, this afternoon. And the police were, they just rang the bell and they said they might come over at 6 to get some more information. I'm sorry.
No worries. Please, at any time.
It looks
Take care of yourself.
I'll see if I know how to turn everything off. Oh, just leave. I see that. Okay.
Thank you, Jean. I'm sorry. I think Karen was saying something and then Linda.
Biases. I think bias comes from your experience. There are people who have experience that makes them form their opinions. We all are like that way, and some of the biases are given through your family, and
we gain them through life experience. I really love that.
Yeah.
I think Linda, you were going to add something as well.
I was just going to say that the way I think about bias affecting what I do is it's a filter that it garbles the information coming into me. So I'm getting the information, but I'm filtering it through something that is not what is in front of me. So I'm adding something to it that doesn't belong in.
I love that. Thank you all so much for kind of adding those nuances. I really love all of the different perspectives. You know, I similarly kind of see biases as these colored lenses that we adopt throughout our lives because of our life experiences, because of things that maybe get passed down to us from our family members or through media, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously. But these are lenses that we use to make sense of the world. This is the reason why two people who experience the same event or view the same case may not have the same interpretation of what happened, right? Because we use our past life experiences to make sense of things in front of us. And sometimes, it may prevent us from being impartial, right? Bias means it's kind of leaning towards one way or the other. We could be biased for something, or we could be biased against something. But in general, it means that we're really not partial, right? Maybe let's see if we could bias folks in action. Let's see if we could make that happen. How easy or difficult it might be. So we're going to say a word out loud together 6 times, and then feel free to do this in your own respective spaces. Feel free to unmute so that we could all hear it together. Right after we say the word folk together 6 times, we're going to ask you a question. And my challenge for you now is to go ahead and just say the first answer that comes to mind, okay? So you don't have to overthink it. Just go ahead and say the first thing that comes to mind. So we're all going to say the word folk together at the count of 3, okay? 1, 2, 3. Folk.
Folk.
What is the white part of the egg called?
White part.
White.
Oh, the yolk.
No,
Oh,
the
the
yolk
white.
is yellow.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I don't know what eggs we've been buying, but we might have to take them back to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's. I don't know. So what is the right answer or better answer?
What?
Egg
But what?
white, albumin.
Egg white. Yeah, that's all they say.
So why did so many of us instinctively thought of or wanted to say yolk? Like, what is that phenomenon?
It rhymes.
It rhymes.
No. Alliteration.
That's what you always hear is
yeah. So, when you think of, we've said the word folk so many times, it kind of primed our brains to think, well, what is that word? That sounds like folk that's related to eggs. Well, that's yolk, right? So in a way, we primed you to say the wrong thing. In as simple as asking you to repeat something as little as 6 times. So now if we think back to, how many times in our lives have we heard messages about people who are different from us? People who are of different racial ethnic backgrounds or sexual orientation or gender identity, or even of people of different skin color or size, probably is more than 6 times, right? Like with folks on the call, like how many of you think that probably you are biased in one way or another? I'll raise my hand. Okay? I think probably it's all of us, right? And the key really here is, are we aware of it? And we've heard of terms like implicit bias, because unfortunately, a lot of these messaging and conditioning that we get often becomes part of our subconscious. And that, although we may act with good intentions, when we aren't always aware of those implicit biases, it could seep into our decision-making and our actions, right? And so there's that disparity between intentions and impact. So I want to really quickly do an activity that I've never done before. I hope this will go well. I will show you all this paragraph that is written by someone in kind of an opinion op-ed piece. So there are several words that have been blanked out. And so you could either scan the QR code, or we're going to put the link in the actual chat. This is a Google form. It's kind of like a survey. I would love if you all would take maybe a couple of minutes to see if you could fill in the blanks. What do you think the author, what do you think the original words were from the author? And just fill in the blanks. I think each blank represents 1 word. So I'm going to stop sharing for now so that you could see better. In the chat, the link to this Google form is pasted in there. So it might be easiest for you to just click that link. If anyone has any difficulties with doing the Google form, please let either Sianne or Allyson know in the chat, and they'll help you kind of do the activity in a different way.
I can't make the words come out, or are we supposed to type into the form that we open?
Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to try it. So I've opened the form. I'll show you all how it should look.
So sometimes I'm finding in the training that if a link is on Zoom, it doesn't always open well.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
So if you want to copy the
It
link,
opened fine. It opened fine.
Okay.
But just type in where it says your answer. Don't try and type in where the line is.
Oh, okay.
yeah. So you
It's a
would
little
want to
less
put
obvious.
here, like for example, it says all children are
Oh,
capable
I
of
see.
blank.
I got it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Not letting me type it in.
Okay. And for those who, you know, sometimes certain computer systems or governmental systems may have difficulties with Google products, feel free to just put them in the chat too if you feel comfortable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot.
Michael, can you go back to the first one where the paragraph with blanks was really big?
Sure, I will do that. So this is the original paragraph. I'll leave this on for a little bit.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I came a little late. And so,
Yeah, so if you can, click the link in the chat for the Google form and see if you could participate in the fill in the blanks activity.
you want us to fill it in?
Just complete the Google form. So it has the paragraph on top. I'll show again.
I don't have that. I didn't come in through Google, so.
Can we put the chat again, please, in the link for folks who may have come in a little later? Thank you so much.
Pat, do you have the can you click on the chat in the toolbar?
I'm in chat and I see the link.
And what happens when you try to click on it?
I can, and it, okay, I clicked on it. Well, I did at one. And there it is. And you want us to fill it in? Your
So
answer?
maybe what we could do also is it feels like folks kind of know each other, feel pretty comfortable. Do folks feel more comfortable if we just did this out loud as a group?
Yeah, I would prefer.
Okay.
That's me.
I see some nods. Like, if folks do prefer not to do that, you could still do the Google form, and I'll try to toggle back and forth. So what do folks think the missing blanks are? We could just go through it. All children are capable of
Creativity.
Success.
Learning.
Success.
I was
Thriving.
reading. I said reading.
Reading. I love that.
Thriving,
And thriving. I love that.
thriving.
Okay. Maybe we'll move forward to the next word, but we cannot expect all students to
Learn.
Excel.
excel.
Or read.
Read. Okay. When far too many are
Sitting.
something stairwells.
At the
Climbing.
bottom.
Climbing.
Climbing
climbing.
stairwells. I like that. That works.
When
Climbing stairwells. With broken handrails and missing steps, tripping and falling as they
Try.
Tried.
tried.
Struggle.
Try.
Struggle.
Right.
Okay.
Struggle.
What was that? And you could feel free to, some of folks, if you want to put it in the chat too. And I apologize. First time I'm trying this, so I see that it's a little difficult to do on Zoom. So this is lesson learned. While others are blank, up
Rising.
on elevators, rising.
Riding.
Going.
Riding, up on elevators.
Right.
Riding, okay.
Writing is better, yeah.
yeah.
Nice. Okay, so ready to see the actual words?
Yeah.
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 Yep.
So a lot of you said success, great job. A lot of you came up with many other great terms too, like thriving, so very similar, but we cannot expect all students to achieve. So I think many of you kind of were on similar veins. When far too many are climbing stairwells with broken handrails and missing steps, tripping and falling as they work to keep up, while others are zooming up elevators. And so this is actually a snippet from a slightly longer op-ed from Dr. Prudence Carter, who teaches at UC Berkeley in the School of Education. So, you know, I think part of the point of the activity is really looking at how do we fill in blanks, right? Like, do we all fill in the blanks with the same exact words? We definitely did not, right? Did all the words have similar meanings? I think sometimes, but not always, right? And why or why not? Like any thoughts on why like we didn't all came up with the exact same words as the original author?
Well, I interpreted this exercise very, very specifically. I read the whole thing and then I said, then I worked my way back to see what must they be doing. And so I wasn't using it as a metaphor. I was using it very specifically as all about the stairs and the elevator. So
Nice. So
I
we
interpreted the whole exercise differently.
may have all had different strategies of how we went about it, to try to kind of get at the underlying meaning, right? And I think, you know, a lot of this is really a demonstration of how we use our different lenses, how our life experiences, and how we may have used those, you know, cognitions to help shape how we fill in blanks. And I think, you know, hopefully this is kind of an analogy of what you all do too, right? When you all sit in front of these participants, you get kind of a synopsis of the case and some information, but you don't have everything. Obviously, this is why you all meet with the participants and have them have an opportunity to ask them questions. And this is how we fill in the blanks, right? And I think the reality is that because of our different life experiences and our different colored lenses, our different filters, that sometimes we don't all approach it the same way, that we don't all arrive at the same conclusions. And that's okay. But I think recognizing that and how those filters shape how we fill in the blanks is important. I think, you know, all of us obviously are here because we want to do good. We want to make a positive impact, especially in our legal justice systems. So although we all have good intentions, nevertheless, those unconscious biases sometimes could negatively impact how we view certain cases, how we view certain folks that are sitting in front of us, and how we ultimately make decisions that could, you know, impact another person.
I think, Michael, that this particular one, intent to impact, is probably one of the most important features. You know, there was a conference in Charlottesville and somebody interrupted another person, and it had to do with class, it had to do with race, it had to do with entitlement, and all of it was without intent, only impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, right? I mean, I think even with the best of intentions, sometimes missteps can happen, and, you know, through no fault of ours, because, you know, we can't always be aware of everything. But I think part of hopefully this training is helping us kind of be able to remind ourselves that we may need to be introspective and be more mindful of some of those implicit biases. I don't know how many folks may be familiar with kind of the concept of transference and countertransference, which was originally proposed by Freud, you know, which still has a lot of relevance today in psychotherapy. But it really talks about how we often communicate subconsciously. Not only do we have transference, which is often talking about a patient or client, you know, being triggered by the therapist because of, you know, because of how the therapist may remind them of past experience or people that they've interacted with. But as service providers, as panelists, we also have something called countertransference, where we may also be imposing our own emotional kind of past experiences, for lack of a better word, maybe baggage, onto the folks that we serve, right? So I think it's important for us to have systems to pay attention to our emotional reactions, to have these sounding boards like Liz, like your case managers, like each other, to be able to check in and to process or reflect some of these reactions that we may have from our panel experiences, right? So I think for sake of time, I'm going to move forward. I'm going to skip some of these, you know, definitions. But can folks share a little bit about, you know, in 2024, we like to think that we are more evolved So in this present day, why do you think we still have biases and stereotypes? Like, what purpose does it serve? Why do we still do this? Why are our brains still wired this way?
It may have been originally, in terms of evolution, a way of protecting ourselves from outsiders.
Yeah, where we had to make quick decisions, where we had to, that split-second delay could mean the difference between life and death, between surviving and not surviving, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Like, for example, can folks share, like, what do you typically name the shape on the far left?
Square.
Square. What about the one on the far right?
Diamond.
Maybe diamond. So what about all the shapes in between? I hate to break it to you, they feel very left out. They feel like they should have their own unique names too. And by the way, they don't want to be called lopsided square or tilted diamonds. They want their own unique names. Why don't we name every single variation of everything? Simply because we lack the cognitive bandwidth, right? I think often when we stereotype, when we make mental shortcuts, it's really for our own benefit. It doesn't benefit the person that we're interacting with because we're not getting to know the full them. We're not spending time to get all the facts, but it is really for our own comfort, right? We like to put things in categories because we feel safer that way. It helps our survival brain, our amygdala, feel safer, to know where things are, to know where things stand, to know where things belong, right? Where people belong. And that's really a benefit for us. And a lot of that really creates this us versus them, right? I think in a lot of social psychology, we tend to know that human beings were wired to kind of put things in categories. Is it safe? Is it not? Is it us? Is it them? Is it in group versus out group? Have you all noticed that when we tend to think of our in-group, we tend to think that it is very heterogeneous, it is very diverse, we all are unique, we all contribute uniquely to the group. You see here all the dots in the in-group are all the variations of the same color spectrum, but we're all slightly different. But have you noticed that when we think about out-group, whether this is a person from another neighborhood, person from another state, a person from another country, a person who is from X, Y, or Z group, we tend to think of them as very homogenous, right? I recently had someone at work share something about, oh, I always wanted to do a road trip, but now with all the things that are going on in different states like Florida and Texas, with all these really ultra conservative policies, I feel like I wouldn't feel safe traveling to some of these states. And I thought that was so interesting because states are so big, right? To really blanketly say, I would never step foot into this state because I don't feel safe in any part of that state. Felt like a very blanket kind of, generalization, right? And we tend to do that often with people we think are different from us. We think that they're all the same, they're homogenous. I think there's also some evidence to show that a lot of group biases are more a function of favoritism towards our own group. We tend to have more empathy and sympathy for people who we think are more similar to us. And those are some of the things that maybe could be red flags for us when we start to kind of, create those us versus them, when we start to see ourselves in situations, maybe creating that. I want to wrap up with this. Before I pass it on to Allyson. But, I kind of want to make a differentiation between these three concepts. That when we just talked about bias, we're really talking a lot about kind of a instinctive inclination, something that is reflexive, right? Often that is subconscious that we may not even be fully aware of. When we talk about prejudice, we're really talking about now how we feel or think about people simply based on their group membership. And the point here, I think, that we're trying to make is how do we prevent all of this, biases and prejudices, from influencing our actions? How do we prevent that from actually becoming a discriminatory behavior? do folks feel like maybe y'all could put in the chat or just say it out loud? Do y'all feel like it is possible for us to overcome biases and prejudices?
No,
Yes.
No.
Not completely.
I disagree.
I think if you're aware of it, aware of it guides your actions accordingly, so you can overcome it.
But I think you need to define overcome, Michael. I mean,
Yeah.
if you mean behave better, if overcome means don't let it affect your actions, that's one thing. If you say don't have that bias anymore, then I think it's a more difficult question.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I see a hand up also.
I think it's very, very hard to overcome biases and prejudices when there's no support system that helps you to overcome them individually, or I think it's extremely hard.
Yeah, I see a lot of that. And I really appreciated kind of the clarification on like, how do we even operationalize overcoming, right? What does that even mean? I really wanted to share two quick things. I think I really agree with everyone on the call that it's really a yes and a no, that we probably can't ever be without biases. We don't want to be humans that are incapable of forming biases, because biases help us survive. We need to be able to formulate biases when we, for example, accidentally eat expired food and get sick. If we can't formulate biases, we're going to keep doing that. Right? That's not good. But
I have another example from the training. It was white right overcoming. It was about this woman, and she went to interview all of the far right people, and a man said to her, "I don't hate you subjectively, I hate you objectively."
What?
Oh.
What is that?
It was, I forgot her name. I forgot. It was a very powerful film that is talking to all of these people who wanted to kill her, who were right-wing crazies. And the guy said to her, "I know you. I don't hate you subjectively because I know you, but I hate you objectively," meaning everybody who looks like her or talks like her. So I think that's kind of it, that we can overcome. If we actually know somebody, there's a bigger opportunity to say, okay, in this I had a bias or something.
Yeah.
So it's subjective, objective. I thought that was like, yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I think a lot of research does show that, you know, when it comes to the unknown, groups that we're less familiar with, just knowing someone, getting to be able to talk to someone, see them as a person, really helps to reduce some of that kind of sense of unknown and stereotyping and biases. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. You know, I think, you know, it is possible, though, to work actively to reduce the influence that biases and prejudices have on how we approach people. And I think I have a couple of studies that I wanted to end with to really show that there is hope, a silver lining, right? There has to be hope. Otherwise, this 2 hours is pretty big waste of your time. Y'all could be, you know, watching TV or cooking or doing something else. So hopefully there is some ways that we could implement the lessons learned today. So I did want to share a couple of studies, both from NYU. So in this study, and again, no research is perfect. In this study, it's also very kind of black versus white, because they had participants who identified as white. And we know that racial categories doesn't include just black and white. But despite that, I think there are lessons we can learn from it. So they had a bunch of participants who were white, and they looked at yearbook style photos. So these were black and white yearbook style photos of either black players or white players. And what they did is they measured their brain activities. What they found is that when these participants looked at pictures of African-American faces, there was momentary activation of their amygdala. Does anyone remember what the amygdala's role is in the brain?
The reptilian brain, I know.
Emotion or
protection.
Yeah.
Is that the fight or flight?
Right, yeah. So part of the older part of our brain, sometimes called the reptilian brain, it's the fight or flight survival center, often responsible for processing strong emotional reactions like fear, right? Um, Again, not necessarily that these are bad, awful, racist people. It's probably a conditioned response that most of us have, right? From how we are receiving messages from media and from the world about people who are darker skinned versus lighter skinned.
Did
So
they
then
do
what?
it the other way? Did they have black players look at pictures of white players?
So in this particular study, and again, you know, like it's not a perfect design, they had white participants only. So yeah, it would be interesting to see the other way, right? But I think the thing that I found interesting is that they had them look at another set of photos. So the second time they told them, now you're going to look at two more sets of photos. The first set are going to be your teammates. These are your people. Then the next set are going to be your opponents, people that you're going to be against. And now both teams will be mixed with both black and white players. What they found in the second round was that these folks no longer had the automatic race-based amygdala response. Now they only had the amygdala response in regards to the opposing team, regardless of race. So even though it's not great that they still had this us versus them mentality, and that's probably hard to overcome, that's very hardwired into our human brains. That shows us that we could train our brains to see beyond our default segregation, that we could train our brains to see beyond race. When we tell ourselves that we're on the same team, I think that's my lesson taken from that, is that when I work with people who are different from me, I had to remind myself extra hard that, hey, we're on the same team. We have aligned goals. Our goals here is for restorative justice, is for the society to be restored, for justice to be in place, but in the restorative manner. When we can see that, we could help ourselves reduce some of that natural tendency to create that us versus them, right? When we work with people who we might feel like are very different from us in terms of values, right? Just like what you all mentioned just then, people who have different political beliefs could still come together and have common goals. And that could make some of that tension disappear. I'll just share one more last one. I want to say that before I share this study that there's a disclaimer that there will be discussions about gun violence and that may be a trigger for some folks. Please definitely make sure you take care of yourself. If you have to step away, please feel free to do so. Okay. So this is a gun versus tool image response study. So this is also from NYU. What they did is they show these participants either pictures of handguns or pictures of hand tools. So like hammers, drills versus firearms. And what these participants had to do is to click the right button to say, did I see a gun or did I see a tool? But what they did also is that they primed these folks. They primed them by flashing a momentary image on the screen. It's so quick that it's almost imperceptible. So what they did is they either flashed a picture of either a face of a white person or a face of a black person. What do you all think happened when these participants were primed with an image of an African-American person?
They chose the gun.
So when they primed them with the faces of black folks, these people were more likely, because they were under a timed situation where they had to quickly make a decision, they were more likely to make a cognitive mistake. They were more likely to mistake a hand tool for a handgun. Does that sound kind of familiar with some of the headlines we've seen in the news?
Absolutely.
Especially of law enforcement shootings of often unarmed African-American young boys and men. And again, there has to be a silver lining. That folks with more positive attitudes about Black folks, people who may be more aware that they could be biased, they showed a greater activity in their prefrontal cortex right behind their foreheads when they did this activity. Can anyone remind us what is the role of the prefrontal cortex?
Management.
Yeah, like executive functions and management, right? It's kind of like our rational thinking brain. So what this tells us is that when folks are more aware of potential biases, they said, you know what? Instead of doing the easy thing, going on autopilot, and going with my gut reflex, which may be tinged with biases that I'm not even aware of, I'm going to actually take more time with this activity and use my rational thinking brain to make logical decisions. And what they found is that these are people who are human, they could still make mistakes. When they did make a mistake, there was a corresponding increase in their prefrontal cortex, which to me shows learning, right? They're learning from their mistakes. They're saying, oh, I made a mistake. That didn't feel good. I'm going to be even more careful from this point on. So I think, at least these studies give me some hope that there is possibility for those who choose to become more aware of their biases and to take a role that may be a little bit harder because it takes more cognitive effort and brain power, but to really actively reduce biases and how it influences our everyday work. I really want to go out with a challenge again to see how easy or difficult it might be to rein in our impulses, okay? Let's do one more activity before we close out. This time we're gonna say the word shop together 6 times. Right after that, I'll still ask you a question, but this time I want us to do something differently. I don't want us to go off of the first thing that comes to mind. Rather, I want us to try to stop, think about it, take as long as you need to think rationally about what I'm asking you, then say the right answer, okay? So we're gonna say the word shop together 6 times. Are y'all ready? All right, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Shop,
Shop, shop, shop, shop, shop.
What do you do when you come to a green light?
Go.
Go.
Y'all did so good, right? Like me, did some of us still have kind of like an instinct or urge to say stop? Right? Like it was there, but y'all overcame it, right? Like you could see that it's not natural. It's easier to go with the flow and to not overthink it. It's harder to have to think about it and to say the right thing. But that's really what we have to do every day, especially when it comes to our work and decisions that often have a lot of great impacts, right? Such as yours. So I think for sake of time, I'm going to pass it on to Allyson so that we could continue some of these conversations, but really bring it to cross-cultural communications.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, so I know Sianne kind of talked about thinking about our different cultural identities and backgrounds, and Michael also brought up thinking about our biases and prejudice and the way that we think. I kind of wanted us to combine these two and start thinking about the way we communicate with other people. I think when we think about the term cross-cultural communication, we may have different interpretations of it, but hopefully at its core, we share the idea that cross-cultural communication is really about respecting human diversity within and across cultural contexts. Next slide, please. So these are just some fundamental patterns that show up when we experience cross-cultural communication conflicts. So the first one is communication styles. So how do we convey and exchange information with one another? Next is disclosure. I think of disclosure as kind of how comfortable are we with sharing information about ourselves and with expressing ourselves. The next one is task completion. So how do we approach a task? What do we prioritize when we think about when we're assigned a task? Next is decision-making styles, and the last one is conflict resolution. Next slide, please. So as we continue with this section, I wanted us to kind of put together all the different factors that we have to think about into a pyramid. So this was a pyramid created by Dutch social psychologist Gert Hofstede. He did a lot of research on cross-cultural communication, on group differences, and what he affirmed is that a person's culture is very similar to human mental programming. So if we look at this bottom layer of the pyramid here with the green words, this is kind of this universal layer that all humans share. It's in our human nature. It's something that we inherit. One example that I think of for this bottom layer is the fundamental emotions that we all feel. So this can include fear, anger, love, joy, sadness, disgust. If you've seen the film Inside Out, there's a sequel coming out, but they talk about the 5 emotions that live in our head, right? So these are emotions that all of us humans share regardless of our cultural backgrounds. Moving up the pyramid, we have this middle layer, the culture layer. So this is kind of this group layer. So the bottom layer is when we're all humans. This middle layer is starting to think about how do humans group ourselves? How do we distinguish ourselves from one another? So one example that I think of here when we talk about cultural layer is what do we do with our fundamental feelings? So for instance, we all share that base ability to feel sadness, but the way that we express it, the way that we choose to cope with it can be influenced by our culture, right? Some folks may feel very open with their emotions and be able to share and express sadness very openly, while others may grieve more in private. And then this last layer, the top layer here is our individual layer. So thinking about our personality, thinking about the way we think, thinking about our life experiences. One example that I have here is gender roles. So certain cultures might maintain traditional gender roles, thinking of men as the breadwinners of the family and women as the caregivers. And even though that may be a cultural belief that our group shares, individually, we may not share that belief, right? So that's where our cultural beliefs and our individual beliefs can start to differ. So I kind of wanted us to frame this when we talk about our communication. So it's not only just our cultures that influence the way we communicate, but our own personalities, our own individual differences can also influence the way that we communicate. Yeah, so moving forward, talking about communication styles. So there was a study done by Dr. Albert Melrovin from UCLA, and he basically broke down communication into these 3 aspects. Can we just click through a little bit to show the percentages? Okay, so what he found in his research is that 55% of our communication is nonverbal, 38% of our communication relies on our tone of voice, and only 7% relies on our words. So I think it's really interesting to think about kind of these first 2 sections, nonverbal and tone of voice, are nonverbal communication, right? It's not the words that we're saying, it's how we're saying it. So really, if we think about it, almost 93% of our communication is nonverbal, whereas only 7% is verbal. So I included a little definition here of nonverbal communication to kind of differentiate it. So verbal communication, I think we all know that refers to the words that we use, the phrases that we use. Nonverbal communication kind of encapsulates everything else. So you can think of it as an additional channel. So this includes the way that we react, the way that we listen, the way that we move, the way that we look. This can include our facial expressions, our body movements, gestures, eye contact, touch, and space. I think for sake of time, I'll just skip through the next few slides. Okay, so one example that I wanted to give here is the word yes. So the way that we express it and the meanings that we have for it can differ, right? So if we put it on the spectrum here, on the far left, I have verbal/direct communication. So yes could be interpreted as a verbal, enthusiastic, and assertive decision, right? Some example statements are, I agree, I will do it. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we could also express it very non-verbally, very indirectly by nodding and smiling, right? So we're not saying anything, we're just moving our body. I think it's important to note that both sides of the spectrum are completely valid in conveying agreement. Some folks might interpret one side as being stronger and more decisive than the other based on how they communicate, right? So if you're someone who really prioritizes verbal communication, who likes to use their words and phrases a lot, you might see the I agree statement as a stronger sense of agreement rather than the nod and the smile, right? Even though both are completely valid. And I think kind of in the middle here, we have the I hear you. So yes doesn't always have to be I agree or a nod and a smile. It can actually just be an acknowledgement, right? So it could just be, I understand what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I acknowledge what you're saying. So as folks kind of take in the spectrum, I wanted us to think about how we communicate with other people, with the people around us. Do you tend to find yourself being able to easily express and communicate with others using your words and your phrases? So really using that verbal communication, or do you find yourself kind of leaning more towards using nonverbal cues, nonverbal communication, using gestures, using your body, or are you somewhere in the middle? Feel free to put in the chat or you can unmute. I would love to hear.
Allison, this is Linda. I have a question.
Yes.
I'm okay. I would be okay with all three things depending on the circumstances. But if I'm receiving information, nodding and smiling may not be enough. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means yes. So receiving information in that way, I would have to clarify. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think it's like a lot of times like the spectrum and like where you identify, it's not just always set in one place, right? Like it depends on the context, like you mentioned.
And
So
the
yeah.
importance. Yeah.
Yeah, and the importance, I agree. Yeah, so it's like it can also be very situational and context dependent, right? It's not just based on our cultures or the way that we think, it's also based on the situations that we're in, the context that we're placed in, right? Yeah.
I also sometimes take into account the person I'm communicating with and what their needs are. If they need an actual a loud affirmation, or whether it just nodding my head will do it for them. And that really depends on my relationship with that person.
Yeah, I like that. So it's not even thinking about like how we communicate, but also how the other person might communicate, right? Kind of a lot of factors to think about. Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. Okay, I think for sake of time, I'll move forward, but I agree with all of your points. The second one I want to talk about was disclosure. So the way that I like to frame disclosure is thinking about our comfort level or our perceived appropriateness about showing and revealing our emotions or showing and revealing our personal information. So as I mentioned earlier, we all share these fundamental emotions, and the way that we express them can differ based on our cultural norms or our individual experiences, right? So I mentioned how some folks may express sadness very openly, while others may keep a strong facade publicly and kind of grieve only in private. I think one important thing I wanted to note when talking about emotion and emotional expression is that the way the openness and the expressiveness of an emotion doesn't equate to the intensity of the emotion felt, right? I think certain individuals find that it's very inappropriate, or they feel like it's very difficult to talk about their emotions. So kind of the same thing here. We also have a spectrum where on the left, we have folks who might be less expressive. So they may see that an overt display of emotion is kind of a loss of face for themselves, and they might actually instead value having a controlled emotional display. While on the far right, you have folks who might see more authentic communication as being more expressive, so being more passionate, being more animated, and they may see kind of less expression as being less credible communication. And kind of just like one thing I wanted to add in addition to this is that when we talk about this, I think some of us tend to lean towards culture, thinking about how like cultural groups tend to lean one way or another. But I think we also want to go beyond cultural groups and think about societal pressures. Like there are certain groups in society that may be encouraged or pressured by society to show less emotional expression. So this can be folks in the military, right? Or when I was growing up, the boys around me were told not to show emotion because it makes them look weak, right? So thinking about like societal pressures. Yeah. Yeah, I think do folks have any questions? Okay, I'll just move forward for sake of time. But if folks have any questions, feel free to put in the chat and I will get back to you. All right, so the next one I want to talk about was task completion. I actually wanted to acknowledge that I was really grateful that the neighborhood courts team allowed our team to sit in on a couple hearings so we could see the process, because I think this refers very strongly to the directive process for neighborhood courts, right? Where folks, or where your team or your panelists assign directives for the participants. So kind of like the way I broke this down is thinking about people who might be more outcome driven versus process driven. So outcome driven individuals are often more concerned with what happens, the final result of a goal, right? So they might emphasize more and prioritize more what completing the goal is, what the final goal is, rather than the steps that are taken to achieve that goal. Whereas folks who are more process driven kind of focus on the methodology, what actions were taken to complete this goal rather than the final result alone. And the reason why I wanted to mention this, because based on my sitting, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the directives that were assigned tend to lean towards prioritizing the process-driven aspect of task completion. It seems like the points of the directives are really for participants to learn from the process, to learn from the experience. So I think it's just important to note that the way an individual views and completes a goal can differ from the intended impact that we want to have, right? I think if an individual tends to lean more towards the outcome-driven idea of task completion, then kind of the process-driven procedure of a directive might not work as effectively on them. So it's just really thinking about like the differences that people may have when it comes to how they prioritize and how they approach completing a task. And then one other thing I wanted to, oh yes, go ahead.
I was just going to add that, sometimes we see that in our therapeutic settings also, that when we work with more traditional, like Asian American clients, they're like, oh, just tell us what to do. And, we just want to kind of get it over with. So when we explain like, oh, we want you to come into therapy and see folks over a period of time, they're like, oh, that many times? Like, can you just tell me what to do and let me, get it over with? And we kind of almost had to explain like, this is not like not like getting a shot. You just get one shot and you're done. It's more like a course of antibiotics, using like primary health analogies, that therapy is really about a process and you heal over time. It's more effective the more sessions you attend, just like a course of medication. So we kind of see that sometimes also within our setting, but in a different way.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Michael. Yeah, I think it's like also being open with what the intention is, because some people might not understand that it's about the process of a thing, of a goal rather than the outcome of it. But yeah, okay, let's move forward. So one thing that I kind of want to mention here that I kind of think is the basis of all the other things that I've talked about is decision-making styles. So the way I broke this down was into individualism and collectivism. Are folks familiar with the terms individualism and collectivism? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of nods. Okay, I'll just do a really quick recap then. So individualists tend to see themselves as kind of being separate and equal among other individuals. So themes that you think of when you see individualism are self-sufficiency, self-expression, individual thinking, personal choice. So really about the self. Collectivists tend to see themselves in the context of the group. They often weigh how their action affects others in the same identity group as them. So some themes that pop up when we see collectivism include relationship, collaboration, and sharing. So the reason I wanted to include this because I think the way that an individual leans towards, like if they're more individualist or if they're more collectivist, can influence where their priorities might lie. So if someone leans more towards individualism, they might really think about what are their individual preferences and interests themselves, whereas someone who is more collectivist might think about, oh, like I would like to hear from a lot of different members of a group about how an outcome might be. Yeah. Yes, was there anything else that I should add here, Michael? Anything that you wanted to also mention? Okay, cool. But yeah, moving forward. Okay, and then the last kind of general area I'm going to talk about is conflict resolution. So I think the way that we approach conflict, both in terms of how we view conflict and how we resolve conflict, can differ from person to person. Certain folks might prefer more discrete methods of conflict resolution, so talking privately or using written methods like emails to address conflict, while other folks might prefer more direct methods of conflict resolution, so actually talking face to face. And I think the way that we address conflict resolution is based on how we view conflict. So certain cultures I know tend to see conflict as something that's positive. It could be a way to encourage communication and collaboration, whereas other cultures might view conflict as something that's embarrassing or demeaning, something that could cause them to lose face. So if we kind of think about how we view conflict, that kind of can inform how we resolve it, right? So if someone thinks of conflict as something that's embarrassing, then maybe they don't want to meet them face to face. They might prefer that indirect method of conflict resolution because it's something that they think should be more privately figured out rather than something that's more out there, more public. Yes. Okay. Moving forward. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of recap all in all what I was talking about. So we can think of when we tend to face cross-cultural communication conflicts. So when do we tend to experience that? I think it's when we're faced with an interaction that leaves us feeling like the situation or the other person is abnormal, weird, wrong. I think the important thing to note with this is that we shouldn't automatically assume that someone being different from us is someone that is less than us, right? Because when we do so, these kind of can roll up to higher levels, right? So if our own biases and our own prejudices are kind of rolled up into kind of higher institutions, that can really be problematic, right? If the systems start to include these biases and prejudice, it can result in exclusion of groups, inequitable treatment, and that can result in things like disparities in terms of access to resources, to opportunities, to representation, right? So I think it's really important that we're able to notice when we're kind of in the midst of a cross-cultural communication conflict. Next slide, please. So I know Michael also talked about transference and countertransference. So I kind of want to break it down a little bit more. So transference is kind of that idea where a client might transfer their emotions about a person or event from their past onto the therapist. And then countertransference is the opposite, right? Where the therapist might subconsciously transfer their feelings or emotions about a person from their past onto the client. And I think this can be problematic when we talk about work, especially social work, because it's important for us to pay attention to how our clients view and react to us, as well as how we react and view to our clients, right? So really thinking about what emotions and feelings come up and why do these emotions and feelings come up? Being aware that our emotions and feelings can really influence the way that we perceive and feel about another person, right? So really kind of digging deep in ourselves and understanding why do we feel certain ways. Let's move forward. So just to end off my section, I wanted to leave everyone with some tips to avoid cross-cultural communication conflicts. First is to notice when we're using generalizations about other cultures. I think it's important for us to ask the question, if we are using generalizations about other cultures, are we oversimplifying a person based on what we see on the surface, based on what we see visually, not knowing anything else about their culture? Next is not assuming there's only one right way to communicate. So I think you all have kind of talked about how there are a lot of different ways to communicate, right? And there are a lot of different factors to think about. So the way that we communicate isn't just based on ourselves, it's also based on how the other person is. And it's not just based on this one interaction, it's based on the context that it's in, right? Next is listen actively and empathetically. One thing that I want to highlight with this one is being aware of power imbalances. I think sometimes we forget that, especially as you are all the panelists, right? You are inadvertently in a position of power compared to the participants. So just being aware of that, the fact that you're kind of in an authoritative state in a position of power. So just being aware of that as you are continuing with your work. Next is engaging in reflections, both with yourself and with the team and a supervisor. I know Michael walked us through this when talking about transference and countertransference. So just being aware of your own reactions, your own feelings, your own behaviors. Why do we think this way? And is it towards certain clients? What are our tendencies? Lastly is understanding that our cultural norms may not apply to the behavior of an individual. We are all shaped by many and multitudes of factors. Thinking about Sianne's slide about culture and all the different elements, right? So it's not just what we see on the surface. It's not just our ethnic background. It's our family. It's our geographic location. It could be our education, our life experiences. I think that is, all right, that is it for me. So I'm now going to pass it over to Sianne.
Great. Next slide, please. So we'll be talking about cultural responsiveness to wrap up this training, and that is the ability of individuals and systems to interact responsively, respectfully, and effectively with people of all cultures, classes, races, ethnicities, and religious backgrounds in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of individuals, families, and communities, while protecting and preserving the dignity of each. So that is a very long definition, but I'll be going over some tips from how you all can incorporate that in the work that you do. Next slide, please. So being a culturally responsive panelist. Next slide. So we'll be talking about these 5 different tips a little more in depth. For sake of time, we'll continue on. Next slide, please. So the first tip that we wanted to highlight is becoming aware of your own blinders. So when I think of blinders, I think of this idea of, I don't know what I don't know. So if you're never in a situation where you really have to think about your blinders or have them get questioned, then you won't really know that they exist. So for instance, one way that you can do that is the implicit association test, which is a list of activities that you can do. It was created by Harvard, and it's a way for you to better understand some of your own filters. And by better understanding your filters, the more you can encourage yourself to undo and unlearn some of these biases. Next slide, please. So a quick true or false. In order to be a culturally responsive panelist, one must eliminate all of their prejudices or assumptions about certain types of clients. What do y'all think? True or false?
False.
False.
False? Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So the answer is false. Even though we are doing this work, recognizing again that this still is a learning process and there are certain biases that we may still hold and we are actively trying to address, but they may still pop up as well. Next slide, please. Another tip we have is being open to learn about other cultures and also being mindful to unlearn. So putting yourself in situations where you're able to experience other cultures and interact with different folks so you can learn more about some of your own blinders. Research shows that the best way to remedy the effect of our own implicit biases is to immerse ourselves in opportunities to make positive connections with diverse groups of folks and experience situations that may put us outside our comfort zones. Great. And something I also want to highlight too is this importance of unlearning, especially around assumptions about certain groups. So for instance, just because someone is an immigrant doesn't mean you should make broad assumptions about that person based on their home country. Folks have different levels of acculturation, which is how they start to adopt parts of their country that they're currently in, and that may look different for different folks. Great. Next slide, please. So another true or false for y'all. A Vietnamese American older individual shows up for a panel. What's the best way to break the ice? A, ask them about how they're doing today and proceed with the panel as usual. B, take an interest in their heritage by telling them you knew someone who fought in the Vietnam War and loved the people there. Or C, put them at ease by mentioning you had a Vietnamese friend once and ask them about their culture.
A.
A, yeah. Yep, that's perfect. So I think with this, just highlighting not treating folks as exotic specimens or spokespeople for their culture. I think thinking back to some of the topics we talked about earlier about intersecting identities and not trying to focus on one specific identity that's easier for you to see, such as someone's race when they first come into the panel, and trying to make everything about that as a way to break the ice. Great. Next slide, please. So another tip we have is watching for discomfort that can signal cultural conflicts, as well as being mindful of language and communication. So I think this goes back to a lot of the points that Allyson brought up earlier around cultural communication and how that can look different for different folks. Next slide, please. So another, I guess our last true and false for y'all. Cross-cultural misunderstandings can lead to mistrust and frustration, but are unlikely to impact participant outcomes. What do y'all think? True or false?
False.
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 I'd say true.
Yeah.
That's false.
So the answer is false. So it does have a lot of implications for the communication and the work that you're doing. If there's issues with cross-cultural communication, clients may feel like they're not being heard, they're not being seen. There might be microaggressions. They may start to shut down, maybe give very limited answers because they just want to get through the process and get it over with. So thinking about that as you're working with clients and keeping in mind when flags come up that there are cross-cultural misunderstandings. Next slide, please. So again, just these are some of the tips that Allyson mentioned. For sake of time, I think we'll continue on, but please feel free to review these again afterwards. And then lastly, just wrapping up this tip, highlighting the importance of language. So some tips that we wanted to include is using language that reflects what people call themselves. So again, taking a step back from some of our own biases and some of our own belief systems, if we see someone, I think our default is to try to put a category or a label, and we want to work away from doing that. So for instance, avoiding making assumptions about how someone identifies or categorizes themselves and wait for them to be able to explain themselves. I think one of the questions that y'all ask in the panel is to ask the participant to tell them about themselves and who they are in the world and what they're like. So we can wait for that situation for us to be able to use certain words or certain labels. So similarly, allowing folks to define their identity, labels, or pronouns for themselves, using gender-neutral language. Another point we also wanted to highlight is using person-centered language. So there would be a person living with a disability as opposed to someone who's differently abled, or another instance would be someone who uses a wheelchair versus a disabled person. So wanting to be person-centered, participant-centered, as opposed to putting this identity, this label on them, because for certain words that we may be using, there may be a lot of stigma, there may be misconceptions, there may be certain things associated with the word. So highlighting the person first. Great. Next slide, please. Great. So our last tip that we want to talk to y'all about is lifelong learning and critical self-reflection. So as you continue with your work, it's okay for you to not know everything about every culture. San Francisco is very diverse. And as we mentioned, you can never know everything about a culture. Folks have a lot of intersecting identities, and there may be identities that panelists or participants may not even bring up when they're at the hearing. The goal isn't to become an expert, but to start to recognize how cultures can influence how participants see and navigate the world, as well as how some of your own cultures may influence how you may show up in the work. Next slide, please. And then again, continuing on with this idea of accepting that it's a lifelong process. Again, going back to that point Michael brought up of acknowledging intention versus impact. Even though you may have phrased a question in a certain way to learn more about a participant and their situation, recognize how it may also present to how the participant receives it. And as we also discussed earlier, this also has implications on how a participant may respond and continue on with the hearing process. Another point we want to make is to not dwell so much on the times you make mistakes, apologize, and figure out a plan to prevent wrongdoings in the future. Okay, next slide, please. And then lastly, we just wanted to end on this idea of equality versus equity. Equality is treating every single person the same, asking participants the same kind of questions, treating them exactly the same, and kind of going through the process of the hearing kind of in a uniform manner. Equity, on the other hand, is recognizing that each person is different and has different needs. It may be adjusting your communication style or line of questioning to one that might not necessarily be the most comfortable for you, but would better allow for the participant to tell their story, rather than them just starting to shut down or give limited responses because they feel misunderstood. It may also look like being patient as you work with a translator to ensure participants are able to fully express what happened. It may not seem like much to make some of these small differences, but they can make a world of difference for participants as well as the communities that have been harmed. Next slide. So with that, I'll pass it on to Liz to talk about the case vignette.
Okay, so we're going to do a role play, and one of you, please decide that you would like to be the participant. Anybody up for that?
I'll do it.
Oh, Gabriella. Okay. So you've brought in because you were carrying a concealed loaded weapon, and you come from Texas, where that is legal. And we're not going to have just 3 panelists. Everybody is going to ask questions. And I'm going to skip the police report because we're running a little bit late. But who would like to be lead panelist, just to kick it off?
I will.
Okay, so Regina, why don't you open? And then we'll all just take turns asking questions with a mind towards curiosity, open-ended questions. And let's see where it takes us, and then we'll debrief.
Welcome to Neighborhood Court, and I won't go through the whole thing, but can you tell us what brought you here today?
Well, I was walking down the street and I was stopped, and for some reason, and they saw I had a hand weapon, and I was taken in. I wasn't doing anything.
What did the police tell you about why they stopped you?
Well, you know what? I have to say I wasn't really clear. It was something about that they didn't know that I had a weapon or something, or that they thought I was going to kill somebody. I really don't get it. I really don't get it.
Okay. Would somebody else like to ask a question?
I will.
Okay.
I guess we all want to, but since I'm going to get off pretty soon, I will go next. What are you doing in California? Are you visiting family or friends?
I'm traveling around. I haven't been to California before.
Are you, do you carry a weapon often in Texas when you're walking on the streets?
Yeah, it's not a big deal. It's really not a big deal. I'm not violent. I'm not doing anything. You can look at me. I'm like kind of like a regular looking person. So yeah, it's not a big deal. I don't know why it's a big deal here.
Have you ever used your weapon?
I don't think really that's the point. I don't think that that's the point.
Are you aware of what the California laws are about carrying weapons?
I guess I really didn't think about it.
I'll let someone else go.
Anybody else?
I think you've covered it, but I would just say, did you know it is illegal to carry a loaded weapon in California unless you have a permit, and I'm assuming that you don't have a permit, or do you have a permit?
What?
Do you have a permit in the state of California to carry a weapon, a loaded weapon?
I don't live in California. I come from Texas, and we can carry a weapon, and I wasn't doing anything. I didn't think of it. I didn't think of it. It's just part of what I do. I just carry my weapon around.
Okay.
I don't even consider it a weapon. I don't consider it a weapon. It's my gun that I carry around.
Pat, go ahead. I see you had a question. Oh, you need to unmute yourself. Go up to the top of your little square. Yeah. No, it didn't work.
Still can't
There
hear
we
you,
go.
Patsy.
Can
Go
you hear
ahead.
me now?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Hi, good afternoon, Gabrielle. I'd like to get a better understanding of what happened. Who stopped you and why? I mean, do you understand why you were stopped by the police?
Actually, I didn't. I was in Golden Gate Park. I was sitting down, having a sandwich. I don't know exactly what I had. I put my jacket, my purse or my jacket, something on the floor. And this officer came up and said, "Ma'am, do you have a weapon?" I said, "No, I don't have a weapon. I have a gun. I always carry my gun. It's just what we do in Texas." And then he took me in. So it really felt like I was victimized, really. I'm not violent. I wasn't waving a weapon around. It's not a weapon, it's a gun. And in Texas, we have guns. And I didn't know it's the law. Otherwise, I didn't know it was the law.
Okay, did the officer take time to explain to you the difference between California law and Texas law?
I think he did. I think he did. I just got so nervous and so upset, but yeah, I think he did.
Okay. And based upon his speaking with you, are you clear now about the differences in laws and what brought you here?
Yeah, but you weren't there. His tone of voice, his body language, he was aggressive to me and I wasn't doing anything.
I understand. And I understand how Texas law is different than California law.
It is. That's right. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to apologize for the officer's behavior.
Well, can I do something? Can I write up a report about him?
You're at liberty to do so, but what you do have to understand, do you take what's the word I'm looking for?
Responsibility?
Yeah, do you take responsibility for why you're here? You're not denying. Ma'am, Gabrielle?
No, I'm trying to get clear. I'll take responsibility that I did not know the law. And I'm here because I did not know the law. And if I'm taking responsibility, I'm taking responsibility of not knowing the law.
Do you understand how it might be a danger to other community members around you who are not, we don't have the same laws here, and so no one else is carrying a gun, and how that might be a danger to the people around you?
I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't waving the gun around. It was just on my side, and I guess it looked like the shape of a gun. I wasn't doing anything.
How
And
do
in Texas,
We
it
need
doesn't
to
matter. I know we're not in Texas, but it's not a big deal.
we need to start
That's a
wrapping up.
big
But
deal.
does somebody who didn't get to ask a question yet want to ask a question?
I'd like to ask a quick
Go
question.
ahead.
Thank you. So Gabriella, one of the things that we want to do as a result of these court hearings is make sure that this doesn't happen to you again, that you don't come back here. So you mentioned that you're traveling around the country, and I guess my question to you is what is your plan to make sure this doesn't happen? Because every city, every state might have different laws, different rules. How will you work to prevent this going forward?
Well, now that I'm aware of the law, maybe I'll check, but really, I think I just want to go home.
Anybody else have questions?
I'm wondering, how did you fly here on the plane, or are you driving? Because
I
surely,
know that you cannot fly with a weapon. So no, I did not fly. I took the bus.
oh, okay. All right, well, thank you for coming. If you would wait outside, we will discuss your case, and then we will call you back in and we will give you a directive. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, everybody, especially Regina and Gabriella for stepping up. So first, I'd like to ask Gabriella, can you say how those questions landed for you?
In a way, Liz, they seem kind of vacant to me, because that for me it was okay, right, to carry a gun. I think more it's like going right back right away to however comfortable it might be for you in Texas. We have this law, and the law is this, and this law you did not follow, and that's why you're here. To be more kind of direct, I think, because I could keep on going and going. I didn't know, and it almost reminds me of, do you remember like some of the prostitution cases we had, that it was really different in, or which is the one that we had just recently, which was somebody selling things without a license in the Embarcadero. And it's like, that might be, but this is the law, or to a minor, this is the law. And regardless of where I was, this is the law here. And you're not a villain, you're not a bad person, but this is the law, and we need to respect the law that is in this country, in this state. So I think it kind of,
I think part of it is we just, we were rushed for time. We didn't want to go into what we usually do in terms of getting to know you. And one thing I really wanted to ask is if you felt you must carry a gun in San Francisco because of all the bad press we're getting. People
well,
think
you
it's
know what it was,
dangerous.
Regina, I was just playing.
Yeah.
I was just kind of playing and not being so compliant and not being afraid and not being worried. I was kind of just,
Yeah.
if it were really here, I would feel, if it were really real, I would be afraid. I would hear that it could be dangerous because it would have been different. I was just like playing it up really.
I know, we were all playing.
Yeah.
Gabriella, would you say then that because you came from the Texas culture, that these questions didn't feel like they hit home for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to walk around with a gun, actually. But that if it were part of my culture, and it wouldn't be a big deal. So why is it a big deal here? And
Yeah,
actually, I don't know in Texas if there's a lot of gun violence. We certainly know there's gun violence here. Or
yeah.
how did I get the gun? How did, how do
Well,
people?
that's the other thing, did you have a permit? I mean, we didn't have time to really go into it, and
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure everybody who wanted to speak could speak, so.
No, I'm not being critical, Regina.
Oh, I
It's
know, I
just-
know. I'm just saying, yeah, it's right. We don't, yeah, I understand.
So how did you all feel that culture played into it?
I was just talking to my niece who actually lives in Texas, and she was explaining how people walk around with their their gun on their holster, and it's and very open, and it's nonchalant, and nobody it's no big deal.
Open carry, yeah.
So Patsy, do
and-
men and women do that in Texas? Do men and women wear their guns outside?
Well, she was speaking specifically about a guy who had
Mhm.
his gun out, and it was you could see it. They walk around with their guns in the holster. And I thought that was amazing. And I kind of wanted to get into that aspect of it because, but we didn't have enough time. And because for a person that comes from a culture where you can walk around with your gun out and go into restaurants and stuff and put your gun on the table, to come to California and where if a police saw that kind of act, saw anything that looked like that, they would get alarmed and probably maybe have spoken to you in a harsh manner that you perceive to be harsh.
So maybe that would have been a good question about people being alarmed. I was in the park. What if there were kids in the park and they saw something that looked like a gun? We're not in Texas. So you know how we always ask the question about what if there were kids around, or what would people think in this culture that doesn't have guns? What would they think? Would they be afraid of you? Would they be worried?
I'm not clear what the object, what's the purpose, what was the purpose of this role play?
Well,
What
that
we
brings me to the question I was about to ask. So, how do you think that you can draw conclusions or at least thoughts about how the culture of Texas and guns might transfer onto the different cultures that our participants are in usually or come from?
For me, if I had not just spoken to my niece about how the culture of Texas and how they walk around with guns and stuff, I think I would have been a little bit more horrified of a person walking around in San Francisco with a gun. But
Me
because
too.
I have that background now, I I wasn't as uptight or worried about the fact that she was carrying a gun.
Yeah, I was kind of confused, Gabrielle, because you were saying it was in your purse, and how did the cop know you were carrying a gun? And that was kind of confusing to me because it wasn't open carry.
But I'm wondering also in the cultural part, because she came, and thank you for the acting job, it was pretty fantastic. You came with the mindset that this was okay, and so your cultural bias affected you in the court as well. So a lot of times people come into court and they know what they did was wrong, and it's a little easier sometimes to talk to them, but you don't really think what you did was wrong. So it makes the questioning a little more intriguing, because we have to connect you to the harm in some way. And so I found that interesting that you brought your cultural bias as well. And so we clashed in the middle, and I think it would have taken a little more for us to find a place where what you did mattered in a way that that you could express it to us, because it needs to matter. I think I didn't get that from you. It was a good acting job.
Who tried to connect it to the fear of somebody who's not used to the gun carrying. I don't know, somebody here, just, I think that would have been a good way in.
Yeah.
But for a person who comes from a culture where they carry their guns around, do you think that would have impacted them?
Well, maybe if they could put themselves in the shoes of somebody who doesn't. You know, I was thinking I might ask, well, since you're used to carrying a gun, you know what that kind of power is. And if somebody was not used to it, how do you think they might feel seeing that gun?
Yeah, to create some empathy. Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
Or if it was more realistic, maybe what had happened was that I was sitting around and that someone saw the gun and then called the police to come over. Maybe that would have been, because really, so they're going to come over. So maybe someone saw it and told the policeman to come over. So there was some sort of fear involved of somebody else.
Probably.
Michael, do you want to wrap it up? We only have 4 minutes left. Is there anything you wanted to do?
Yes, I think I just, want to share one last thing if you all could help us. And again, you all do such great work. It is such challenging work. I'm so grateful that so many of you are so passionate about this and that are part of community boards. I've included the link to our post-test and survey. We are funded by the San Francisco Department of Public Health to do to be able to do this type of work for free. And so it helps us to maintain our funding and to show how many people we reach. So if you could help us do the survey, it again is a Google form. So if you had challenge with the previous form, just give it a try, see if if this one works better for you. There are 5 questions to ask you to see how much you retained from the presentation. And then there's also an evaluation for you to give us feedback on how we can improve.
Michael, can you send it to us on email?
Yeah. The link doesn't work for me, so I'm just writing down the site.
Okay, that's a good idea.
And I'm going to send it too.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, I appreciate that. We'll work with Liz to maybe get the link out to as many people who couldn't do it right now. But if you can, please fill that out for us if possible. I'll stop sharing because I think you already have the link. And thank you, Liz, again, for inviting us to be part of this process. We always gain a lot from doing these type of trainings as well. And so really appreciate it. What about Sianne and Allyson? Did you want to throw in anything at the end?
Thank you so much for coming and presenting. And thank you to everybody for participating and for being a good sport with the role play.
Oh yeah, y'all did so good. Gabriella, I wasn't sure. So can I ask you, this was not pre-planned? You kind of just jumped into the role because you did so good. Felt like you should get like an award or something, like for acting.
Thank you.
What else is there to say?
Thank you all. I mean, I didn't know anything about this, this health coalition, and I'd really like to know more about what you all do there. So I'll do my research when I'm done here.
I'll drop my email in the chat too, please. We welcome anyone to connect with us, and we'd love to learn more about what all of you all do too, and to hear more from folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thanks to everyone.
Bye.
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 Gabrielle. Oh, she left. I'll have to call her. I haven't seen her in a while. I'm sorry I was late. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm glad you
You're
came.
fine.
Okay, thank you. And I did get the part I saw, it was enlightening.
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.